Today we're going to be tying a wet fly that you can swing through the current. Here I'll be using a size 8 to use with my spay rod. However, you can downsize it for smaller fish or to use with a nymph setup. We'll start off with some black thread, secure it to our hook shank, and snip your excess free. At which point, we'll continue to wrap backwards, slightly into the bend of our hook. Before grabbing some yellow and red marabou. We'll pull free a few fibers, a couple clumps from the yellow and a single clump from the red, before securing them tightly to the back of our fly. We'll take several thread wraps in front, before taking our thread, adding a wrap behind it to help prop it up, followed by a few additional thread wraps on top. With this secured tightly in place, we'll grab our excess marabou, bring our thread forward before folding the marabou back over and securing it just short of our hook eye. And snip your excess free. At which point, we'll cover up our tag ends, continuing to do so, wrapping back towards our tail. With this complete, we'll once again bring our thread forward and grab some wire. Here I'm using the size brassy in the color silver. We'll secure this to our hook shank, wrapping back towards our tail, continuing to cover up our tag ends in the process. Once we reach the tail, we'll set our wire aside, bringing our thread forward and grabbing some tinsel. Here I'm using a holographic tinsel in the color silver. However, you can use a standard one as well. We'll secure this to our hook shank, wrapping back towards the tail once again. Setting it aside and returning our thread to the head of the fly, laying down a smooth thread base for our following step. With this complete, if you have a rotary vise, you can whip finish. Set your thread aside before grabbing your tinsel and beginning to wrap it forward in close touching spirals, slightly overlapping the previous lap so that none of the underbody will show through. And if you don't have a rotary vise, you can easily do this by hand, and we'll continue wrapping the tinsel forward until we reach our thread. At which point, we'll secure it in place, taking some wraps over the top of it, before snipping your excess free. At which point, we'll grab our wire and begin to wrap it forward, this time counter-wrapping the tinsel and wrapping it forward in open spirals, adding some durability as well as texture to the body. Continue to do so until you reach your thread. At which point, we'll secure it tightly in place, taking thread wraps both in front as well as behind our wire, and helicoptering the excess free. Wrap back on the body slightly to help secure it in place before grabbing some dubbing. Here I've selected to use a light yellow dubbing to add some contrast. Cover up your tag ends and grab some dubbing. But before we create a dubbing noodle, we'll first grab some red saddle hackle, pull a single feather free, wrapping it around the fly so we can gauge how long we want the fibers to be. Once you find the size you're looking for, we'll pull those backwards and snip the tip into a small triangle, using this to secure it tightly to our hook shank. Cover up your tag ends and grab your dubbing. Create a tight dubbing noodle. And begin wrapping this just in front of your red feather, building up a slight transition as we work towards the head of the fly. And you can continue to add and tighten the dubbing as needed, stopping just short of the hook eye to save some room for our following steps. With this complete, we'll lay down a thread base leading up to the hook eye before wrapping back on our dubbing slightly. At which point, we'll grab our red feather, pull the fibers backwards, and begin wrapping it around our dubbing for about 2 to 3 turns, with our finishing wrap laying just in front of our dubbing. Secure it tightly in place with your thread, and snip the excess free. At which point, we'll pull everything backwards, taking some securing wraps in front and wrapping back on it slightly to help give it a brush back look. At which point, we'll grab some yellow saddle hackle, pluck a feather free, and measure out the fibers to be a bit longer than the red, securing it tightly in place just in front of our red. And snip your excess free. Cover up your tag ends. Before grabbing your feather, pulling the fibers backwards and hackling it around the head of the fly for 2 to 3 turns. Once happy, we'll secure it tightly in place, taking thread wraps both in front as well as behind, and snipping your excess free. Pull everything backwards, taking a few thread wraps in front to help build up a small head, and brush the fibers backwards. Once happy, we'll whip finish to hold it all together and continuing to build up our head. Snip your excess free and carefully paint it over with some UV resin, trying to avoid the fibers so they'll have as much movement in the water as possible. Once happy, we'll fix in place with a UV light. And this is a Mickey fin wet fly that makes a great attractor pattern to swing through the current in the fall. This is one I like to use with my spay rod, leaving the fibers as long as possible to help increase the movement. And it's a fun pattern to tie that works particularly well this time of year. And if you'd like to win it, comment #flies in the comments below. Subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next one.